Yo, what's up, boys and girls? It's SwoleTrain, and I'm back at it again with a video. Something to deliver today. Welcome to the May 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list. It is finally here. It has finally arrived. You guys have been asking since March for an updated tier list, and here are my thoughts on the 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list. Now, this may not be the definitive tier list, but it's pretty dang close. Now, first things first, I want to address something before we get into this tier list. You guys were asking about March, April, and May, and I just want to say that April, y'all are saying, why isn't there no April tier list? Where's the April tier list? Well, let me clue you on a little secret. Between March and April, up until April 29th, because that's when the new ban list was released, we didn't get squat in terms of changes. The meta was practically the exact same, and even now, the meta is slightly different. In its own way, it's pretty much the same as the last format, but with a few new additions and a huge powerhouse in the higher tiers. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right into this May 2019 tier list. We're going to start off like we did last time with table 500 low tier and mid tier, and then we're going to go into the high and top tier. Let me break down essentially what those mean. Essentially, table 500 are the decks that are your for funds deck. They're at the very end of the tournament. They're not necessarily taken seriously. If they're not on this list, not to say that they're bad, it just means that I may have forgot something, and they're also just not good enough to compete at the top level of the meta. Even low tier, mid tier, and high tier, you get some regional and local play, but the table 500 decks are nowhere to be seen. So unfortunately for them, and they're going to be represented by, once again, SpaceMambo.deck Turbo. I'm looking forward to creating this deck one day, and I hope you guys are too. But for now, SpaceMambo.deck Turbo is what we're going to have to go with to represent our table 500 decks. But without further ado, start off with the low tiers. Now, the way I kind of structure these tier lists, instead of doing A tier, B tier, C tier, or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 0, that kind of thing, is I like saying top, high, mid, and low tier, because I don't necessarily have to explain what those means. It's pretty self-explanatory whenever I get on there. I don't have to say, oh, well, which is better, tier 3 or tier 1, even though, you know, most people do already know. However, I feel like low tier, mid tier, and high tier are a better descriptor for decks inside of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because I do feel like they add a little bit of I don't want to say leeway per se whenever you're going into matchups between the decks themselves, because sometimes low tiers can take it over high tiers, sometimes mid tiers can take it over low tiers, sometimes they can take it over top tiers, so on and so forth. But the way that these are structured, top tier through low tier, are because they are based off of tournament results. They're going to be, this is going to be based off of the tournament results, based off of my own experiences, and based off of what I think could be potentially the bigger picture for these decks going into YCS Knoxville, going into the later YCS, the Nationals, going into other regionals. And this is what I think is going to be here for the May 2019 tier list. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump into the low tiers here. And starting off, we're actually going to go ahead and get some mid-tier contenders for the low tier to start out with. We're going to start out with Lunalights. And man, I think we actually had to go with Prank Kids as well. These two decks are fairly similar. Now, I will put Prank Kids a little bit over Lunalights in this way, but the reason why I'm putting these two at low tier now where they were mid tier before is that I feel like Lunalights and and Prank Kids had their experimentation whenever we had them win in YCS. Yes, we had our fun. It was cool for a few events, but now it's over, okay? We can get back to playing real Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm just joking. These decks are a lot of fun to play with, and also if you're a fan of these decks, you know, congratulations on these decks winning your YCS. You know, I wish that Heroes would win a YCS, but unfortunately, I'm gonna have to put them in the low tier because number one, they're super susceptible to hand traps, and they actually have really bad matchups against the rest of the decks inside the meta currently, especially Lunalights. Lunalights have a little bit of interesting OTK dynamic to them, and they did have Azathoth given to them, so they had the Azathoth Turbo engine with them, you know, things like the rank up magic, and also into the Time Thief Redoer, that kind of thing. But because Azathoth is out of here, well, they are gone as well. So I think that Lunalights probably won't be seeing play anytime soon. Maybe a little bit of experimentation with, and obviously it's a deck that is still very complete. It's still a very fun deck to play at locals or play with some friends. Similar thing with Prank Kids. I feel like Prank Kids nowadays, people were kind of thrown off by them initially, and people were kind of just scared of what they could do. Obviously, they have some pretty interesting effects they can activate on your opponent's turn, which is pretty fun. But overall, they just don't necessarily have the power, the consistency, and they also don't have the resilience. They can't can't play through hand traps like some of the other decks. So I feel like that's going to be where that's going to lie too. These decks also struggle going second a little bit whenever you consider the other decks in the format at the current moment. Yes, Lunalights do the OTK, I understand that, but they're not necessarily as good at breaking boards as the other OTK decks inside of this meta. So let's go ahead and move on to, I kind of want to put down Necroz. This is a fan favorite deck, and this is a format defining fan favorite deck at that. So Necroz is really interesting because I got a lot of comments in that comment section down below being like, well, Necroz won a regionals, Necroz, you know, we're topping here and there, and that is fair. And, you know, Necroz, I feel like does have a pretty fair representation in terms of its deck, and depending on the people that play it, you know, I feel like this deck can actually do quite a bit. It has a lot of really good locking, it has a lot of really good stun, it has a lot of really good power it can turbo out with this, and it's relatively consistent thanks to the incantation archetype. However, and this is just maybe not me thinking, maybe this is me just like looking over the results and everything, but how many of the Necroz decks do you actually see topping events? How many do you see them winning YCSs or getting those top 48 slots of YCS? I mean, we're seeing less and less every single day. Those players that bubbled the YCSs, those players that were going on to day 2, those players that are getting the regional top 48s, top 32s, they're not necessarily happening anymore. I mean, yeah, we get that one that actually won the regional just not too long ago, which is very good, and congratulations to him. But I think with Necroz in particular, it's very similar to ABCs and relatively similar to Cyber Dragons, where it kind of just takes a single player that really knows what they're doing, really knows the matchups, really knows the meta, and is very comfortable with that deck. And I don't necessarily say that, you know, people aren't comfortable with that deck, but I will say it's like a like not Calvin to Han thing. It's kind of like, you know, with ABCs, essentially. ABCs in the right hands, baller. ABCs in everyone else's hands, not good. So we're going to go ahead and put that at low tier, unfortunately. Again, not the worst deck in the world, but in terms of how good they are comparatively to the other decks, I think they have to rank that low tier spot. So they did drop a tier similar to Lunalights and Prank Kids as well. And previously mid tier, now onto the low tiers. And this is actually something that I don't think is going to change. Dark Warrior I'm actually put below Necroz, because I think Necroz is a little more consistent, a little more powerful in terms of complete engine, and I say complete for a good reason. Now, I actually think that Dark Warrior can do a lot of things and turbo out things on the board. Obviously, you have things like Izzleback to Wizzle, Two Tails of the Noble Knights, and they also have the Orcish engine at their disposal, but that's actually going to be a different category altogether, so hang on for that one. But Dark Warriors in themselves are very interesting because they went from this powerhouse deck with Gokis, essentially being the warrior engine for that, and then they went to the Azathoth and the Rongo Miniad deck. That was pretty crazy in itself. But now we kind of see them having this weird identity crisis where they don't really have a win condition, if that makes any sense. I mean, maybe Zexal, your topic Zexal, if you really wanted to get specific with it. However, only certain decks can do that. Only 6 Samurais can really turbo out themselves, which is kind of neat, but even then it's, again, super susceptible to hand traps and crazy inconsistent. So you do have to open the absolute nuts to get the absolute victory with that one. But that's where I'm going to put that one. It's going to let it rest. Maybe Dark Warriors will just die out completely, but I still see variants here and there. And some of them are, you know, fairly okay. You're going to see that at regionals. Maybe you're going to see it at locals, just because people have the deck core and they want to experiment around with it and see how they do. So I'm going to put that one in the low tier below Necroz for that one. Similar case, I'm actually going to be talking about, let's go ahead and put the vampires / zombies inside the low tier. So the reason why I'm putting this inside of low tier, at least for now, excuse me, is because I think they actually have a lot of potential. It's one of those low tiers where I can definitely see a few more pieces of support and a few more keys clicking, and they definitely will have a good matchup against the mid tiers and high tiers, maybe even top tiers. I mean, as of now, they have a pretty decent Salamangreat matchup because of things like Zombie World, allowing that your Salamangrates aren't Cybers in the graveyard, they're zombies. And it's also one of the best decks that can use Rivalry and also Gozen Match if used in a specific build. Now, I think Rivalry of the Warlords is significantly stronger for the deck. It's also a little bit better to run the Zombie World Turbo, because that Floodgate is actually relatively hard to get around. Yes, you can remove it off the field, but the deck can do it relatively consistent, and of course, they have a lot of big players that can negate things on your side of the field. Zombies are, again, a big synchro deck as well, so they can turbo out things like Psyframe, Gear, Omega, which is a great extra deck card in general. So I'm going to place that right there into the low tiers. Again, with this deck, and I guess kind of like Necros, they may be missing like 1 or 2 pieces to kind of make things click, either in other decks not being so good in the high and top tiers, maybe in the mid tiers, or themselves getting new support. So I'm going to go ahead and just place that one there. That's where I'm going to feel pretty comfortable with that one. Now I'm really like curious to know, because I'm looking at these things, the decks we have left, and I'm like, wow, a lot of these are actually pretty dang good. But you know, I'm gonna start off with, unfortunately, one of the worst casualties of the May 2019 format, and that is Blue Eyes. Shout outs to Black Kaiba, by the way, excellent YouTube channel. But Blue Eyes is really interesting because they lost the Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon, which became the Galaxy Eyes Doesn't Matter Dragon. Man, that joke is worn itself out. But they became irrelevant and does not matter because of that hit. Now, they could honestly turbo out that really easily. That's probably one of their best win conditions. And they also had crazy combo potential with the Guard Dragon engine. Now, Blue Eyes themselves as a normal deck, just straight up like classic Blue Eyes, probably would be inside the table 500 somewhere because they're not really doing a whole lot. But the best variant, the most optimal variant being the Guard Dragon Blue Eyes, is still pretty good. It's still pretty decent. Has a lot of consistency players. I mean, you have things like the Melody of the Awakening Dragon, which can search a bunch of your cards. You also have things like Staryu Jet at disposal. You also have, again, like the Guard Dragons. The Guard Dragons are pretty nutty, turboing out things from the extra deck for negations, for big boards, for big bodies. And of course, Blue Eyes are 3,000 beaters. They have access to Hope Harbinger and some of the crazy XYZs like that. So unfortunately, they don't have things like Dark Matter Dragon, but Blue Eyes are still a fun deck to play, but unfortunately are now low tier. I think they were probably always low tier. Just again, it took the right wave of support to kind of make them better, and now they're kind of back to bad. So that's unfortunate, but that's going to take us to the next deck I want to talk about. And I think I actually want to start now with a heavily requested deck for this tier list. Now, people in the comment section of the last video, the last tier list, were like Swolelax, Swole, where is Cosmos? And we're going to talk about Cosmos. Cosmos are actually, unfortunately, low tier. Now, I don't know if I want to place them roughly somewhere in here. You know, sometimes they are better than Necros, other times they're not. I'm actually probably going to place them there just because. And this is unfortunate as well. You know, Necros were a pretty powerful deck back in the day, and at least whenever you saw the I think it was Dark Destroyer get unbanned completely back at 3. You guys saw some experimentation with it. You saw a certain regional play, and of course you'll probably see some regional and local play with this deck. Of course, I mean, there are very dedicated players to this build and to this deck and the strategy, and I actually like it a lot. You know, big beaters that are actually pretty cool floating effects. And in addition to that, the artwork's just beautiful, and they have a lot of negations. They have a lot of potential as well, and they're relatively cheap. You don't necessarily have to run an extra deck with them, though it can be helpful. I think the big problem with this deck is that unfortunately there are just too many outs to these big monsters, and they aren't really doing anything. Like, yeah, maybe, sure, in the right hands, this deck could be pretty good. However, I definitely don't think comparatively to the rest of the decks inside the format, and especially a lot of the decks in the mid and high tier, this deck just doesn't perform as well. It's not as consistent, it doesn't play through as many cards, and again, there's way too many outs to these big boards and to these big bodies. So that's gonna be a no from me, dog, and that's gonna be a low for you, dog. Next, we're gonna go ahead and go into the mid tiers. The mid tiers are actually really interesting because I feel like the mid tiers could easily be high tier. It's essentially the decks that I'm gonna be talking about with the mid tier are things that I feel maybe are going under the radar at the moment. You know, again, a few little pieces of support, maybe a few different new cards, not necessarily even the support of the same archetype, but other bits and pieces, like maybe some nerfs to the high and top tiers, and these decks could be pretty solid. Now let's go ahead and start off with those decks, the control decks specifically. Now these are going to be kind of the main point of these mid tiers. We got these 3, kind of like last time, we're going to talk about these 3 popular control decks at the moment that are all trap based, I want to say. Things like Guru Control, things like Altergeist, and things like Paleozoics. Now, Paleozoics frogs actually haven't seen play in quite some time. which is it's okay. Like I think Paleozoics and Totally Awesome. Totally Awesome again is one of the best boss monsters in the game. But Paleozoics and Totally Awesome and the Frog Engine, they actually, I think they're probably just missing the Marine Cess cards. The Marine Cess cards are cards that are actually out in the OCG at the moment, and I think complement this deck quite well. So maybe once we see those cards hit the TCG, we'll be getting a little more play of the Paleozoics and a little more of the strategy. But for now, I think I have to put it in mid-tier. It's also at the very back of mid-tier because it's not as good as Altergeist. It's not as good as Guru Control. And even then, I don't even necessarily know if Altergeist is above or if it's below Guru Control, but I definitely know that Paleozoics and Frog Paleozoics are actually way over here. Now, still mid-tier though, still very respectable. They can still have certain consistencies. And of course, being a trap deck, they can kind of steal some wins from some of the top tiers. And maybe some of the high tiers as well. So it just really depends. That being said, moving on to the games that could again steal from the high and top tiers, we have Guru Control and Altergeist. Two cards, or two decks rather, that I feel like are very similar in terms of play style. You know, obviously you want to play a slower control kind of snowball game where, you know, as the match progresses, you're gaining card advantage and you're also gaining board positioning, which is really great. Guru Control, I think, does that a little better than Altergeist still. It's unfortunate that Altergeist haven't necessarily seen a new tech, even though they got some new cards. And the combos for Altergeist are a little bit better than things for Guru Control, but Guru Control is just really consistent. Subterra Phoenix is a great hand trap for the deck, and you know, Guru itself being able to flip cards, the Book of Moon effect, is pretty solid. Where I feel like Altergeist themselves, yeah, you have Marionetter, and yeah, you have, what's the other one? That's the Miloseek, and then the Multifaker. All excellent cards for the deck. I mean, they function really well in terms of their combo potential, in terms of like throwing your opponent off guard, and oh god, excuse me. And the fact that you can search from the Sequelities, or even the horse one, that negates the attack and negates the effects, all very, very solid, you know. And then the Hexja, and Hexja is a still pretty great link monster itself, can get itself to a big body and has a built-in negation. Solid. But unfortunately, Subterra Guru kind of does a little better. Not only can Subterra Guru play things like Pot of Indulgence and Pot of Extravagance, excuse me, to draw cards from their extra deck, which they don't really need. They also have the Book of Moon effect, which again is really, really strong. They also have Subterra Phoenix, they have the Behemoths. They have the Clash of the Subterras. I think that's the trap card, that's what it's called, that can reset itself. Also a pretty crazy card. They can play things like Lose Turn 1. And they also have things like the Hidden City, which is a very nice spell card, which gets them to their pieces. So I feel like it's a mid-tier is where those things are going to lie. Unfortunately, I think we're in a control format that's a little more combo-centric, and it's really funny and a really interesting point I want to bring up just really quick, is that I think that the format kind of shifted from more of a balanced control focused format to now being a little more combo centric, and we might actually see that starting to bubble up sometime soon. I guess this is the symbol for bubble up as well. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to the rest of the mid tiers. I'm gonna go ahead and say that tisk. Let's go ahead and put Pendulum Magicians inside of the mid tier. Now, strangely enough, Pendulum Magicians are not the Endymion Magicians. These guys, that's right down here. So the Pendulum Magician deck at the moment is a deck that I feel like is just trying to be what it used to be. You know, they're turboing out a bunch of cards, getting stuff out from the extra deck, and I just think it's a little bit too fragile. You know, it can break boards relatively easy. There's not necessarily a whole lot of comeback potential. And the fact that Electromite is kind of the main pivot card for the deck that can be hit, and if that card's done, then you're all sorts of out of whack. Then, you know, that is very unfortunate. The deck is pretty weak to that. However, they do still run cards like Chronograph Sorcerer, which is still a pretty great card in itself. And I think that the deck still has a lot of potential. They can definitely steal some wins from the high tiers and maybe even the top tiers because of how much it is, you know, it's still very, very consistent. It's still very powerful, but it just takes a little bit extra. And I think that also just takes a little bit of extra work comparatively to things like the Endymion deck. The Endymion deck's kind of the new Pendulum Spice right now, but the Pendulum Magician and Endymion spell counter deck, I don't know how you want to really call it, the spell counter strategy for the Pendulum monsters are a lot more effective than the old school style. Yes, you have things like the Dynamis, which can go into your Cyber Dragon Infinity, which is also pretty solid for an extra negation. Yeah, you still have things like your Odd Eyes monsters. You have things like your Zephyr and Electromite, and however, Endymion has that too, but Endymion also has things like the Mythical Beast Cerberus and has things like Mythical Beast Jackal King. So just a little bit better, and I feel like we're going to start to see Pendulum Magicians kind of fall lower and lower on the tier list as the months and as the years go on. Once a top tier, if not one of the best decks inside the format, now they're just okay. Still, you can bring them to a regional, still you can bring them to a locals, but YCS, I don't necessarily think they're going to be topping anytime soon. If I'm wrong, that it could be just because it's a mix of the Pendulum Magician deck and the Endymion deck. But that's a completely different deck entirely. I'm talking probably pure Pendulum Magicians at the moment, not the optimal version with the Endymions. So that's going to be that for the mid-tier. Next, for going on for the mid-tier, let's go ahead and talk about the Danger deck. And this is going to be actually a deck that I think is going to be... we'll put it below. We'll put it below here. So represented by Danger Sneck here, we have a mid-tier deck that is almost undefined anyway. It's kind of like the last time I put Mothman as this representative for the deck. Well, essentially what I did is that this Danger Sneck is representative of decks that just run the Danger engine to kind of supplement either the draw power or to kind of supplement their special summoning ability. So unlike Danger Orcust or Danger Thunder Dragons, which can use the Danger cards in a better manner and can also gain card advantage off their card being sent to the graveyard, the Orcust and Thunder Dragons, well, this deck I think just kind of makes a kind of a bigger problem. You know, you can't just shove a bunch of hand traps inside a deck and expect it to be good. You can't just shove a bunch of dangers in a deck and expect it to be good. The synergy kind of has to be there, and so I feel like Danger as an archetype and Danger as a supplement engine kind of is right here in the mid-tier strategy. I'm going to put it very low because it just depends on the deck what it is, but we're going to put it smack dab right there. So that's going to be that. Moving on, I think we're going to go ahead and place the Trickstar engine, boop, right there in the upper mid-tier sector. Now, I actually wanted to put this in low tier previously, and I don't necessarily think it's necessarily better than Guru Control or even Altigeist. In fact, I actually might want to place it like right there, actually, because it's less consistent, I want to say, than Guru Control in terms of topping, in terms of placements. And you don't really see a lot of players for this deck anymore. It's kind of a control style that's gone out of favor for things like Altergeist and for things like Guru, but it's still very popular for the Sky Striker variant. It's still very popular for the, I guess there's a Mystic Mine variant as well. I don't really even know that's a whole other discussion for another day. But I definitely feel as if Trickstars have kind of fallen out of favor, but they are still pretty mid-tier for the most part. You still have some dedicated players, you still have some people topping with them, maybe at regionals, maybe once in a while. But if you're not playing the Sky Striker engine, if you're not playing it a little more aggressively, then I don't necessarily think the pure variant of Trickstars has a lot of staying power. Yes, you can still do Droll Reincarnation, which is still at 3 for some god dang reason, but overall, I think as a control strategy, as a control deck, and even at its matchups inside the other tiers, with the high tiers and the top tiers, even some of the other mid tiers and even some of the low tiers, I think that Trickstars, again, like Pendulum Magicians, are going to kind of fall lower and lower into the tier. So I'm going to place them right there in mid tier respectively. Not a terrible deck by any means, but not the best deck at all. So that's going to be that for the mid tiers. Oh, I just spotted it now. I missed this little person right here, the Glass Souffle, representative of the wow, I almost blanked on the name. The Madolche archetype. The Madolche archetype is gonna be in low tier, baby, right here. So I missed this low tier for a quick second. It kind of blended in with the background for me. I know this is gonna sound really disappointing for a few people. I know they just recently topped. I know there's an OTK that you can do with it. However, it's very similar to ABCs, kind of similar to Necros, and kind of similar to some of the other more rogue strategies that have been kind of popping up recently. It takes a very skilled player, not necessarily saying that you're not skilled while playing this deck, but it takes just the right player to play this deck. There's also a little bit of a learning curve with it. Its combos aren't necessarily the easiest and is also very fragile. And once again, very similar to things like Necros, even similar to things like Dark Warriors, the comeback potential for this deck is just non-existent. You know, you have certain things that it recurs value and sometimes can chill back into the deck, which is very nice. However, I don't necessarily see it doing anything crazy anytime soon outside of maybe a few niche placements and maybe outside of a few highlights. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are really excited and really hyped to see Madolches do so well, especially with the new card that came out. Unfortunately for me, that's going to be a low tier status, and that's going to be a hefty low tier browning out, as we have a lot of decks in the low tier. Wow. But I think that's where we're gonna have to end it for the low and mid tier decks of the May 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list. Tell me what you guys think into the comment section down below. Do you guys agree with my list? Do you guys hate my list? Tell me, what do you guys think of it? Next time, we're gonna go over the high and top tiers. I personally think this is actually a relatively diverse format for what it is. You know, the high tiers last time were pretty insane, and this time they've kind of shortened just a little bit. But comparatively, the mid tiers and low tiers, you know, we have a pretty decent spread in terms of what people are playing, in terms of what people are topping with, that kind of thing, what's doing relatively well. So I'm curious to see, and I'm curious to see if any of these decks upset YCX Knoxville, if any of these decks upset any types of regionals coming up soon. I'd be curious to know. But tell me what you guys think of it inside the comment section down below. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like. If you want some more, please subscribe. Got more videos coming down the pipeline, so stay tuned for that if you want to. But yeah, that's all I gotta say for this video. I will see you guys in the next time when we talk about the high and top tiers. Peace out.